another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. My guest today is Niko. I'm gonna totally butcher your last name, man. I'm sorry, Jilch, and I'm gonna ask for that correction in a second. Really excited about this, but before we start the show, I want to give a shout out to who powers the show. SwanBitcoin.com. It's the best place to buy Bitcoin. Buy Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. They incentivize self-custody and dollar cost averaging. It's awesome. Check out SwanBitcoin.com today. I want to introduce, or no, I want to bring on stage, better said, Nico. Nico, how do you actually say your last name?
Hi, Nico. It's very nice to meet you. It's Jilch, so it's a
Yeech.
at the end. Yes. So
Yeech. Okay. All right.
ich,
I
it's a
learned something today.
yeah. It's not that easy.
Nico.
I'm sorry.
Yeech. Okay. No, it's a common occurrence. Nico butchers names. The only ones I could do is like American names and then Hispanic names. Those are the ones I have. I could actually pull off. Do you know Knut Svanholm?
Yeah. Sure. I've met him. Yeah. We
When
actually
he
we spent almost a week in Bulgaria a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, okay, how
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love him, man. I love his work. But yeah, when he came on the show, I said Newt Svanholm.
I think he's used to getting his name butchered as well.
It is, but now I know it. Now I know it. Knut Svanholm and Niko Jilch.
With an
Jilch.
L. Jilch.
Jilch.
Yeah.
Jilch.
Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't
Oof.
worry. It's just Nico. You'll remember Nico, right? That's not so hard for you.
Yeah, but I have to start getting to the habit of getting the names right. Anyways, look, I love your work, man. If anyone hasn't checked out his Substack, I definitely recommend it. And there's something on your Substack that called my attention, and it was your piece on why central bank digital currencies are a terrible idea. And the reason I wanted to talk about today is because it was finally announced. Here I have the screenshot right here. It was finally announced by the New York Federal Reserve, and multiple global banking giants start a 12-week digital dollar pilot. And we also know that the Biden administration, in their digital assets framework that they were released, not only did they talk badly about Bitcoin, but what the piece that was very striking to me was this report that was released by the US Treasury. And in the name of that report, it was called The Future of Money. And that entire report, I kid you not, they mentioned stable coins, they mentioned payment platforms like Venmo, Cash App, etc., etc. But in that entire report, they never mentioned Bitcoin. So in the eyes of governments and central banks, right, Bitcoin is just a distraction. And now what's really interesting, though, is also in the Future of Money report, they never mention the reason as to why people are opting out of government money, which is censorship and inflation. They never mention that, right? So, and of course, it makes sense because they love that ability to print money. They love that privilege of being able to create money for free that everybody else has to work for. So, Nico, what are your thoughts on central bank digital currencies? What's going on over there?
So I think it's a good idea to start at the beginning. Basically, in 2012, the ECB, the European Central Bank, they actually had a paper on Bitcoin. It was called Digital Currency Schemes, and it was a paper on Bitcoin and the Linden dollar from Second Life. So they had these two weird digital token things in one paper, and they actually had a page in there about Austrian economics and the economic reasons behind Bitcoin and the idea behind Bitcoin. And they mentioned that Bitcoin was founded, was discovered maybe in order to have an alternative to government money. But this kind of reasoning, this kind of narrative was forgotten later on. And today we have a situation that is a lot more emotional. We had in the wake of the FTX collapse, we have German central bankers and ECB central bankers going on into the media saying, "Oh, it's all bad," and I also like it uses too much energy. Did you know it uses too much energy? And this is the best reason, the best reason we have to introduce central bank digital currencies. So I think there's many angles to talk about this. There's many ways you can arrive here. You also mentioned that there's banks and credit card companies involved with central bank digital currencies. Actually, the guys who are literally building the money printing machines, they come from Germany, and they are also involved. They're also trying to come up with some software for central banks. So first and foremost, it's a business for some, or a potential business for people to provide the software. And then there's, of course, the policy side of it. And right now it's a bit like, it's like within central bank circles, it's a bit like ESG. It's something that everybody can just talk about and be smart about, right? And the real question is, are they dismissing Bitcoin because they fear it so much, or are they dismissing it because it's just they cannot fathom that there might really be an alternative, and they'll just say, well, it's a fad because there cannot ever be a real alternative to the wonders of central bank fiat money. But when you really look into what central bank digital currencies will bring to the world, well, first of all, it's not much from a consumer perspective. I mean, it's even hard to explain to anybody what digital central bank money is supposed to be, because most of my money is already digital, and not even like the Bitcoin, even when you talk about fiat. And then there is the problem of geography. So why would we need digital money? But it stops at the border, right? So from a European perspective, it's really for them, they're very nervous. The ECB is super nervous because they have the problem of the Chinese coming from the east and having already advanced digital money, and then they have the problem of the US coming from the west, having the dollar, which is already the world's reserve currency, the world's most important currency, the world's commodity currency. It's also the stable coin for the world. When you look at a crypto exchange, you don't need a euro stable coin. Besides tax reasons, there is no need for it. I can use a dollar stable coin as well. And then you have the euro, and we're supposed to be only using the euro. So at least when it comes to competition, they can't really get around it. They could, basically have digital country zones that are basically like digital prisons, but it really makes no sense when you look at it from first principles. Of course, what the world basically needs is one digital money, and that is going to be Bitcoin. And from an economics perspective, it's totally easy to understand, but they're not going out without a fight. Absolutely not.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with that last part. Right, is that they're not going to go out without a fight, and I think the reports and Nico, we're Nico and Opti. I mean, myself and Opti, better said, are in this very privileged position where we have awesome partnerships that allow us to cover the news on a day by day basis, and I fundamentally believe that is something malicious. It is not. They don't actually really care about the energy usage. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the United States, right, in the digital assets framework released by the White House, they were basically saying that if the Bitcoin mining industry isn't able to adhere to certain standards, which no other industry, including gold mining, is made to adhere to, we should ban it all right, just like communist China. So, and also another example is Norway. Norway is very interesting because we know that 98% of energy production in Norway comes from renewable energy sources. And specifically in the north, where the majority of Bitcoin mining happens, 100% of the Bitcoin miners are powered by renewable energies, but certain political parties in Norway still wanted to ban Bitcoin mining, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, Nico. Maybe I'm just so used to being attacked as a Bitcoin content creator, but to me, it sounds a lot more malicious than oh, we just don't know any better.
Well, when you look at some of the announcements from the ECB, especially the early announcements of central bank digital currencies, they actually went out with the argument of, yeah, we're going to use a lot less energy. So they already they let their guard down that one time. Well, we don't really care about Bitcoin, but our thing is going to use a lot less energy. Did I say more? I mean less. And then there is this because I come from the media, so I see everything that's happening in the media, and it's rather easy to see how these memes and these narratives are getting played in the media. And my argument is this: if you really care about the energy usage of Bitcoin, why do you never talk about gold mining? Gold mining is a lot more energy intensive. It's a lot worse for the environment, and nobody ever talks about gold mining. If you really care about Bitcoin being used for illicit activities, why is nobody ever talking about Monero? It doesn't make any sense. Why is there no politicians and central bankers going on about Monero in the news? If you really care about Ponzi schemes being built upon Bitcoin, why is FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried is still getting like the nice treatment even by the New York Times today, which was absolutely appalling. I mean, I have no idea what's going on there. I mean, it's we look to the US. Being a bit smarter about these things, but it seems like right now you're dropping the ball there. And then there is the political, like you said, the mean-spirited approach, and that is coming mostly from the political left, from the socialist left, because they rightly see Bitcoin as a threat to their hegemony over basically the money usage, because Bitcoin will turn off the faucet. And if the faucet gets turned off, the power goes away. And this is not only true for the central banks, it's also true for the politicians. So they are widely attacking it within Europe, within the European Parliament, within the different countries. One country more, one country less. Interestingly, you're right, it's the Nordic countries like Sweden. I didn't know about Norway. Norway is not in the EU because they have too much oil, so they don't join the EU, because then they would have to do some other rules that they didn't want to do. Just like Switzerland is not in the EU because they have too much money. So they are going to be smarter about this anyway. But the arguments are mostly because I think they smell that this is something that could really hurt their power, and that's why it has to go. And I actually did an interview with Berger. What's his name? I'll come up with his name, his first name. He's a member of European Parliament who actually was the guy who was in charge of MiCA, the markets of in crypto assets regulation that's coming out of the EU Parliament. And he talked in my podcast. He talked about and he's coming from the conservative side, from the German conservative side, and he said, all of this, it was not about Bitcoin at all, because Bitcoin is not part of that legislation. But the leftists, the socialists, and the Green parties, they actually tried to put in a proof of work ban within this legislation without him even noticing. So it's on the agenda. It's especially on the agenda of the European left right now, and you can see this when you look closely. You can see this in the politicians, and you can also see it in the central banks, because they say they are independent and not political, but everybody there has some political affiliation. And if they are going to fight Bitcoin, it's mostly coming from the left, which is not saying that the right is an ally. It's probably not, but they don't worry about Bitcoin so much.
No, go ahead.
It's okay.
Sorry, I thought you were done talking. But look, so it's interesting that the concept of it's coming from the political left, and we started picking up that pattern very quickly. New York State, which is it's run by the political party in the United States is the Democrats, and also full mining ban, full proof of work. They actually waited till after the election to sign that into law, but yeah, they passed a law there as well. Now, the reason that's interesting to me is because the left, and to me this is tragic. This is tragic to me. But Bitcoin has this one of my favorite features of Bitcoin is that it exposes everybody's incentives, right? And the political left has been sold as we are for the little guy. You know, we are for the person that can't take care of him, can't take care of themselves. But unfortunately, right, the reality is that every time you print money, it's a wealth redistribution mechanism from the lower middle classes that don't have the means to save in assets, and the wealthy benefit from asset inflation, and of course the government benefits because they enrich themselves via the money printing, right? They get to pay, whether it's a war, a social program, anything that they can't afford but they can afford due to the money printing. And that part is heartbreaking to me, because I really believe that, and again, it's not monolith. There's people on the right that don't like Bitcoin, but I agree with you that the pattern, the troubling pattern, is that the main attackers on Bitcoin's proof of work, and what keeps it uncorruptible is coming from the political left. But I also have a little bit of hope because we're starting to see, shout out to this awesome podcast. It's called The Progressive Case for Bitcoin, right? We have Jin Urso, who is sitting on the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and they sit on the left, and they're big advocates for Bitcoin. They're big advocates for proof of work. Do you believe that will ever, because at the end of the day, I fundamentally believe that Bitcoin is apolitical and it's for people on the left and for people on the right. Do you ever see a world where that, the current pattern that's happening today, starts to dissipate, and we have support for Bitcoin coming from the political left and coming from the political right? Because I fundamentally believe that it helps both sides. On the right-hand side, it's about sovereignty, and the left-hand side, it's about the little guy. It's about helping the little guy. And what better technology is there but having a currency where if you're working you get to keep all of what you worked for, rather than how it is today where you work and you're being stolen from. We're privileged to live in countries that the inflation rate isn't anything too crazy, even though I know it's about 10% in Europe today, in Germany, better said. But do you ever see that changing?
So there's two things here. The fiat money and fiat money inflation is absolutely the exploitation of the working class. I mean, and every Marxist should be fighting this. But the political left as an organization is probably not going to embrace Bitcoin because they, I mean, one of the 10 points in the Communist Manifesto is literally talking about one bank to rule them all, right? So that would be the digital central bank, the central bank digital currency, right? Which is, by the way, one of the reasons why the banking system and the bankers really don't like central bank digital currencies. That the moment they moved on Bitcoin, and they're still in the background, but I talked to them, the moment they moved on Bitcoin was the moment when the central bank started talking about central bank digital currencies, because central bank digital currencies can totally kill the banks. And also they can give the central bank a way to bail out the little guy and let the banks fail, which would probably be a good idea, to let some banks fail, but they don't want to be too small to be failed, right? They want to be too big to fail. So there's going to be conflicts there. There's also going to be the question in Europe, which is absolutely unanswered so far, in my opinion, is, first of all, is the ECB even within their rights to introduce a central bank digital currency? The lawyers need to be talking there, because the ECB is a framework that is used by 19 different nation states. It's not like there's like, we're not the same, right? We use the same currency, but there's no certainty there that they can just introduce this totally new thing that is not defined yet, right? And then there's the question, if it gets introduced and if we need to change the treaties. Because if we change the treaties that touch the Eurozone and the European Union, in some countries, there will be referendums. And I can already tell you how the referendums are going to end. But we have a very interesting way of dealing with referendums in Europe, which is do one referendum after the other until the outcome is as they want it to be. We've had that in certain topics years ago, before the Euro crisis even. So there's this. Then there is the question of Eastern Europe. When you go to Eastern Europe, when you talk to a group of young people, about Bitcoin, the Eastern Europeans will get it immediately, because their families have lived through communism, their families have lived through hyperinflation, and they will get it immediately. Not even just the inflation part, more the censorship resistance and the control part. The Western Europeans are saying, how about we try some communism? Has never been tried. Yeah, communism. And it's really sad. It's really sad, but it's the truth. And it's changing, but we haven't experienced it, and there has never been in Western Europe. We don't have this strong commitment to the market economy and capitalism that you have in the US. So you don't have that. As a politician, you can never go on stage and say, I like capitalism. You're done that day. You're done, right? So that's the problem. But ironically, the euro is also in its core. It's not very, but it's kind of similar to Bitcoin, because the countries that joined the euro gave up their national currency. They gave up their monetary sovereignties. We have modern monetary theorists, idiots running around in Europe because they like the idea, but in the end, it doesn't really work, because these countries do not have monetary sovereignty. They cannot print their own money. Austria cannot print its own money. Now, that was the idea. That's how it was sold. And then, of course, all the rules were broken when the crisis hit, and now the central bank is just monetizing that without saying so. And we have high inflation, and we have Christine Lagarde, who does not know what she's doing at the head of the ECB. And in the end, it's the question for me. In the end, should not even be, will there be a central bank digital currency? The question is, will the euro survive this? Because I've actually been somebody who likes the euro. I like the idea of the euro being a challenger to the dollar. But right now it's not looking good, and I don't know if I still like it, because as a supporting mechanism for what's happening within the European Union, it's probably not doing any good, because since the last couple of months, especially under von der Leyen, the European Commission president, not many good ideas have come from her. She wants more control, more money, whatever. So with your question about the political right and the political left, I think it's possible in some instances, because I think that the people who joined the protest, the people who joined the parties, the people who joined the leftist parties, the people who actually want to change things, they will end up at Bitcoin. And I can see this today. In Germany, we have the same thing. We have, like in the US, we have leftists Bitcoiners, and we also have fights between libertarian Bitcoiners and leftist Bitcoiners. And Bitcoiners are very disagreeable people, and Twitter is not helping. But there are some who get it, and funnily enough, like the very first, let's say, mainstream generation of Bitcoiners have been leftists, but they are salty now because they didn't buy, or they sold too early, and now they hate it. So there's this anti-crypto, anti-Bitcoin, because now a business as well, like this Steel guy and some other guys in America. We also have them in Germany now. They go to the talk shows and talk about energy usage and all that stuff, And now, of course, because of FTX, they have a very good time. But so the political left is not loving it. They are more on the MMT train right now. They just want to print it all, basically. And the political right, yeah, well, it depends how you define political right, really, because we have more than one party, and even like the conservative centrist party are not that right. And then the right parties are really, really on the right side, very nationalistic. So and they don't talk about the whole money thing at all, really. So it's really hard to say if how quickly it will become a political issue. I think that the US is far more advanced when it comes to that subject.
100%. And it's unfortunate. To me, it's a tragedy because I see Bitcoin as helping every single human being. And hopefully, over time, that starts to shift. Anyways, I wanted to read this passage because it's a very strong passage. And it was one of your Substack posts. And it says the year is 2050. Cash has largely disappeared from everyday life. Anyone caught with any form of paper money is considered suspicious. Drugs, money laundering, sabotage. Cash is dirty. The currency is digital now, but our digital payment transactions have long been fully monitored. This has given economists and central bankers completely new possibilities, as well as the police. Having this conversation, this is a wet dream. They're not even hiding this anymore. This is what they want. They want you to own nothing and be happy. Their own propaganda is saying this, but that is only possible if they have complete control of money, the monetary policy of money, of what you can and what you can't spend. And Bitcoin is a fundamental threat to that, right? And I guess that explains the digital attacks. Nico, could you elaborate of what life would be like under a central bank digital currency for everybody?
So basically, there's this German movie that has I think has had some success in the US. It's called Das Leben der Anderen, Life of the Others. It's about life in communist Eastern Germany, and it's about this one guy who spies on some other guy and makes it his life's mission to spy on him. Basically, he basically sits across the street and spies on him for years, and that would be what we would have with a central bank digital currency. And there's no way around this, because once you have this honeypot of information. Politicians, police, and even central bankers will just use it. So life with a totally controlled central bank digital currency will be absolutely horrifying, because not only do you have the censorship and the political control and the surveillance, that is why Edward Snowden's talking about this all the time, because surveillance is his topic. Not only do you have the surveillance, the really scary part is the economists. Because right now we are in a situation where fiat money and the central bank experiment is on its last legs. And we've been knowing this for a very long time, but we didn't know how creative they will get with prolonging the system. And central bank digital currencies, and this is also why I put economists before even like central bankers or politicians, and the police, because economists are crazy. Especially Keynesian macroeconomists who think they can steer the economy in any direction, right? They want us to not only own nothing, they also want us to steer into social credit score system. You bought this. Maybe it has too much, CO2 emissions. So tomorrow you cannot buy something else. And you already have this in China, where people cannot send their kids to the right schools because they said something on the Chinese Twitter that was not communist enough. It's absolute insanity. And the thing is that this works in China, and it will probably work in Russia, because these countries are very autocratic and very collectivist. And in the end, the question is, are the people going to accept it in the so-called free world, in the so-called liberal West, right? Because I am absolutely of the opinion that as long as we fight back, we do stand a chance. This is not a certainty, absolutely not. It's not a certainty on the technical side, because you don't know how they are going to do it. They don't know how they are going to do it, because if you have a central digital currency, nothing can go wrong. If you get hacked, what are you going to do? When the media says the euro just got hacked, so what's going to happen then? With the euro, even if there's just a rumor about it getting hacked. The second thing is, where are they going to get the developers? Where are they going to? They're central banks. They're not computer companies, so they're going to buy it from some private company, like they're doing now. These things with MasterCard and the banks. I actually like to say, if you're young and if you're into computers, if you like to do something with money, maybe get a job at some of those institutions and maybe leave some bucks. because this is an important fight for our future. We can, if we lose this, we really have a huge problem. And I don't know, how far along we are, but I do think that if we push back, and if the information spreads faster than they can develop their surveillance currencies, that we do have a chance to stop this. Really, I really think we do, because we also have Bitcoin, and Bitcoin. I mean, can Bitcoin be stopped? You tell me, Nico.
Absolutely not. The incentives are way too great for the honey badger to. The incentives are, look. I'll give you an example. Nigeria, right? We had this very famous post that was released by the United Nations, and it made this whole case about how we can't let developing countries adopt Bitcoin and use Bitcoin as a standard. And their solution was try to regulate the on and off ramps, making it very difficult for people. And then the second solution is what we must introduce our own digital currency. And they did just that in Nigeria. And what was fascinating, the case study about Nigeria is fascinating because it's exactly like you said, Nico, earlier. In Western Europe, they still haven't burnt their finger with a collectivist ideology. In Eastern Europe, myself, I'm originally from Venezuela, right? You smell that and you're like, oh my God, I've seen this before. Eastern Europe, they smell it, they're like, I've seen this before. Things aren't free. There's always a cost. Nigeria is fascinating because they tried their country, their government currency is called the Naira. And the government, in hopes of keeping people using the government currency, they released the e-Naira that was backed by all the academics, backed by all the individuals, backed by all the bankers. It utterly failed. And right now it's estimated that between 30 to 40% of the Nigerian youth population is using Bitcoin. And why is that? Because the incentives of Bitcoin, a censorship resistant and a capped supply, meaning it's a deflationary currency, will always beat an inflationary currency and a censored currency. And Nigeria is great because Nigeria, their inflation rate is over 50%. It's some absurd amount. So what incentive do someone in Nigeria has to adopt a central bank digital currencies, which is why I completely believe we will win at the end.
And it will win in Africa, South America, and Asia first, because people really need it there. And here we understand it technically, we understand it philosophically, and yes, now with the inflation raging, people are getting more interested, and it goes hand in hand with people losing faith in the government structures. And we've seen this with COVID. It started like everybody was basically saying, "Oh my God, the government needs to help. We govern us harder, lock us up at home." Everybody was on the same page. I was actually saying, let's do this for 2 weeks and then get through it, and then it's done, right? Because it was such a psychologically stressful time, right? And then with time, people started asking questions, and people were getting more suspicious of the activities, and especially here in Austria, in Germany also to an extent. It's also interesting to see that the politicians are just utterly incompetent. They are basically idiots. And it's hard to say that, and it's hard to see that, but it's also a little bit of comforting to see that, because they don't have a big plan. They just do whatever needs to be done to get through the week, basically. This is also something that ties into the idea of the sovereign individual, this book from 1995, where they say that people will get more rights digitally and more possibilities, and politics will not be so important, and politicians will have to try and be clowns, basically, to actually get the attention. That's how we get Trump, and that's how we get Johnson and Kurz in Austria. And now, I mean, people are starting to ask more questions. The war in Ukraine is the next thing. You might be on one side, you might be on the other side, you might be undecided, but that there's a whole lot of bullshit coming from the media, and especially interesting in Austria because Austria is in the middle of Europe, but we're not NATO. So here the media is a bit more, looking at both sides, at least in theory. I don't really have a strong opinion, but and also then there's like the real stories. I've been talking to a girl from Ukraine who took her money out in Bitcoin. I'll publish a podcast with her on the Substack that you showed. It's called Fix the Money. So there's the real stories there, the real stories of people using Bitcoin to help themselves and others. But yeah, I mean, when you look at Nigeria, it's also interesting. They actually banned Bitcoin a couple of like 2 years ago. They banned Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin usage went up threefold within a couple of weeks because the people said, well, if the government bans it, we have to try it, And there was a great article in the Guardian, of all places, that actually really did a very good job of writing about this and documenting this process, how the government utterly failed to stop Bitcoin. And you know why the article was so good? Because it was actually written by a Nigerian who went out on the street and talked to the people, and not just some guy in London who had to go to his next lunch meeting, right? And so there's still journalism like that being done, but very rarely. And there you get a glimpse of what people really do. I mean, I've heard stories about, you said you're from Venezuela, right? I've heard stories about houses being built in Venezuela with Bitcoin mining already built in, so they can heat it with the government. And the funniest thing about autocratic and socialist governments, from Venezuela to Iran, is that they always subsidize energy, because if you don't subsidize energy, you get your head chopped off by the people. You get hung from the next tree. So you need to subsidize energy so people can heat their homes and cook their food, right? But if you give them subsidized energy, they will use that energy to mine some Bitcoin because the currency is worthless. So you actually give them the energy to help themselves. Yes, that's the incentives, but do we really go from point A to point B without a lot of trouble? Probably not. It already started, and there will be more. I don't know. I mean, I think if we see politicians really embracing Bitcoin at some point, and I think that will happen because, I mean, you've met one or two Bitcoiners, right? And they are very passionate about Bitcoin, and they're not going to vote for anybody who doesn't like Bitcoin. So, and we are basically one issue voters around, and the new not a party, but how do you say? What's the word for like a group of voters? There's a word, right?
A coalition of it's
Basically,
a voter
yeah.
base. It's a voter
Yeah.
base, yeah. But yeah, it's fascinating watching this play out. They don't know what to do, and they'll never admit as to why which is fascinating, right? In Nigeria, the UN, the IMF, the hostility of Bitcoin by the IMF, the World Bank, the ECB, Federal Reserve, they'll never acknowledge as to why people are seeking an alternative, right? It's like they're avoiding the inflation topic. They're completely, trying to brush that aside. And that's the reason, right? Look, and unfortunately, it's what you said. Because people are looking at Bitcoin more from a speculative basis in the United States, right? They're not, that incentive isn't there. But if I'm in Venezuela, if I'm in Nigeria, and the question is, yes, support the central bank and government, use their currency, versus let me actually put food on the table, right? It's a very clear decision every single time. And I completely agree. And that's something that I've always said for many years now. And a buddy of mine, Alex Gladstein, wrote a book about this called Financial Privilege. Mm-hmm. The reality is that 60% of the world does not have the privilege of living in a country that has a stable fiat currency that's not stealing from you enough for you to actually realize and do something about it. But anyways, I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about, because we talked a whole lot about the demon coin, central bank digital currencies. I want to talk about.
Can I say one positive thing though? One positive thing. I mean, the implications of the whole world being on an easily accessible hard money standard are absolutely staggering. If you have millions and millions of Africans actually being able to, save their money and actually use their money like it's supposed to be used, who knows where the next Amazon is going to come from? Who knows where the next Jeff Bezos is going to be born? How much human potential has been wasted to inflation and corruption around the world? We don't know. And we have a whole class of economists who say, well, the money can't be hard. If the money is hard, then, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to steer the economy. But that's, of course, total bullshit. I mean, I had Ramin Damisadegan, who is actually an Austrian economist from Austria, on the podcast, and he gave me this statistic. He said, where the country with the most per capita economists was actually the Soviet Union, because you need economists if you want to, do some steering in the thing. You don't need any economists. We need to stop, building economists. We need engineers. We need doctors. We need probably more content creators, but we absolutely do not need more economists. And because they are not, 99% of them will never get a job in the free market. They all work for government, right? And thinking about a monetary system that actually works for itself, that works for everybody, and it actually works, it's absolutely amazing. And so what I try to do when I go on like television or podcasts with like mainstream media, I give them the idea of, we talk about robots taking our jobs, right? But we always talk about robots taking the jobs of the little people. The woman who works in the supermarket, she loses her job because of a computer. But I like to think that Christine Lagarde will lose her job because of a computer. And the guy who talks shit about Bitcoin, the Frankfurter Allgemeine, will lose his job because of a computer, because we do not need these people. They don't even do their job very well, The inflation is raging, and if it's not raging, it's too low. It's always a crisis. There always needs to be some emergency money printing package. It literally does. Officially does not work, but they still act like they are the guardians of the universe. So at some point, push will come to shove. The question in Europe will always be, will it be in this situation that we have right now with the European Union or the Euro, or will that just go away and we go back to nations, which is totally an option, and many people would actually welcome it. Of course, we need to keep like a couple of treaties so we can cross borders and we don't have to pay for roaming in another country and stuff like that, but that's not going to be that hard. But that's a bit in the future, I think.
100%. The thing that I found fascinating with what you're saying, Nico, was, and it's something that the sovereign individual did touch upon, right, is that it's not only Bitcoin, but the internet is going to breed this entrepreneurship worldwide, the likes of which we've never seen before. And I've actually experienced this myself, right? I hire Bitcoiners all the time. I don't even know what their real names are. Sometimes they're on the other side of the world and they give me work and I pay for that work. Like, look, here's like, I don't need to know your name. I don't need to know who you are. And that is going to benefit developing countries the most, because they've been cut off from the financial system completely. And what blows my mind, Nico, is that the IMF, the United Nations, which were pitched to us as institutions that were supposed to help us. In fact, in the United Nations report, at the very top, their slogan is literally, quote, prosperity for all. Right? And that's bullshit. It's prosperity for all as long as we have control. But it's the fact that they have control is what's causing and is what's stopping prosperity for all in the first place. And this kind of ties this in with what you were saying about Christine Lagarde, Jerome Powell, all these central bankers, all these institutions, the IMF. Bitcoin completely disintermediates them. They no longer need to exist. Now we know what our monetary policy is going to be for the next 100-something years, right? Thanks to Bitcoin and Satoshi. They don't need to exist. And what I'm seeing, Nico, is that they're trying to justify their existence to everybody. And you're starting to see little totalitarian slips out here and there, and trying to beat you into the ground and saying, we do need to exist. You couldn't survive without us. And it's bittersweet to see. You see it, you're like, yeah, they're losing. They're freaking out because of it. But at the same time, we're definitely entering the then they fight you stage for sure.
Yeah, we're in the middle of and it's very hard to, see how we're going to get into this future without like these institutions, because these institutions are so important to the way we live today, right? I mean, even the Nobel Prize in economics gets paid for by the central bank. Yeah. And then of course the IMF and the World Bank have both been introduced in order to stabilize the system of Bretton Woods, because they basically introduced the stabilization mechanism because they knew it wouldn't work out of the gates. And then, of course, like bureaucracies always do, they find new things to do, right? The Bank of International Settlements was set up in order to facilitate the payment of gold debt from Germany to France after the First World War. Nico, I can tell you that debt has been paid, and the Bank of International Settlements is still there. They're very powerful, and nobody knows what they're doing. The police is not even allowed to go into the premises. They are above the law. And this is also a thing that we have to talk about at some point, because of course, I mean, if these institutions need to get dismantled, not only economically but also practically, then we need to talk about how to do this legally, basically. But this is also a problem in the future. So maybe at some point they'll probably going to buy Bitcoin in order to justify their own existence. Maybe that's they hold gold, right? They hold gold. They hold it to control it. I mean, they do. I think they do. I don't. I mean, of course, I don't know, but I've been in the Austrian central bank, and I've seen the gold with my own eyes 3 times, because we actually got the gold home. We got a large part of it home, half of it. It was stored outside of Austria in order to keep it safe from the Russians officially. But now we got at least half of it home. Why did we get it home? Because the governments do not trust the after 2008. The governments are not trusting the financial system as much as they did before. So at least having some gold within your country's borders sounds like a good idea. And actually, the whole euro system has more, like almost 50% more gold than the US has. So there's also that part. They could try and play the gold card actually before they buy Bitcoin.
100%. And Nico, I want to take advantage of the fact that let's take advantage of the last 10-15 minutes of the podcast, and we've been talking about the demon coin. We've been talking about the last boss, right, which are central bank digital currencies. And what I want to spend the rest of the podcast is talking about the alternative. And the alternative is Bitcoin. I always say this, maybe it's a little bit hyperbolic, but it is what it is. Bitcoin or slavery. Bitcoin is freedom. Central bank digital currencies is slavery. That's the world that they want for us. You see it in the propaganda. They want these passports. They want to control the money. If they enable these digital currencies, look at what already happened in Canada. But they had to go through. They at least had to go through a bank. What these CBDCs will enable them to do is flick of a switch. You have a wrong political thought, and they're already rolling this out in China, which is crazy. So what is the alternative? Go ahead.
And there was this article that I always show in my talks about the German Bundesbank, the German central bank, actually having a Zoom conference with the Chinese central bank about what to do with the digital euro, which is absolutely appalling to me, because the Germans are not supposed to take cues from the communists. It's because at least the Bundesbank is I mean, Germans love the Bundesbank because the Bundesbank gave them the D-Mark, the German mark, after the war, after the inflation. Germans and Austrians hate inflation because they had hyperinflation in the 20s, and we still, people still talk about it. I'm totally with you when it comes to Bitcoin or slavery. It took me a while to get it, but in the end, once I realized that Bitcoin actually gives us a fighting chance, because gold really doesn't. Gold just gives us like I can hold my gold and be very scared, you know. But this is actually, I mean, at least we can have fun going down.
It's you're spot on, and gold is limited. Like, look, I'm a Bitcoiner, and I would tell you, I'm the first one to tell you, I love physical gold. Like, if you have a bar, or whatever, do that. The issue arises when try to send that. Let's say you live in a totalitarian country, try to go across the border with a great deal of gold, and if it gets so bad, you could bet that they will check your teeth at the border to see if you have gold with you. How do you stop someone going across the border memorizing a 12-word seed phrase?
Yeah.
And then that gives them hope, because they could take all of their wealth with them, so it completely changes it. And I'm going to use that to segue to another one of your articles on your Fix the Money Substack. I'm going to read the headline. It says, "The fight of our lifetime. Yes, Bitcoin is an inflation hedge, but it is much, much more than that." And I added that. I'm sorry. It is also much, much more. Better said. With Bitcoin, we have a system that is run by the people, for the people, completely bypassing the broken legacy system that centralized power in the hands of the few. But it's funny, because when you hear Christine Lagarde and when you hear these monetary demons talking about it, they phrase it as if Bitcoin is a non-public money, but their central bank digital currencies, their fiat money, is somehow a public money. I don't know about you guys, but I could verify what the supply of Bitcoin is right now. I could issue Bitcoin by mining that Bitcoin. The ledger is completely transparent. Their system isn't transparent. You don't know what their monetary system is. It's a few bureaucratic elite that get to make the rules for everybody else. So do you want to elaborate a little bit on your post, Nico, the significance of it, and what a world would look like under a Bitcoin standard?
Okay. First of all, yeah, I mean, if you really break down to the arguments that central bankers make for central banks, they say that they are independent from the state and that they fight inflation, right? Money, price stability. So basically, two things that Bitcoin absolutely does better than them, in every possible way. So that's a very, very weak argument, because nobody really believes that they are independent from the state. That's completely done. I mean, if you believe that, you need to be treated. And are they fighting inflation? Well, no. It's not in their interest to fight inflation. They have an inflation target of 2%. They never hit it. Either they undershoot or they overshoot. Now they're overshooting. I wrote this article actually because I was supposed to be talking about, is Bitcoin an inflation hedge, in Amsterdam at the Bitcoin conference, and this is one of these talking points. I mean, in the end, yes, if you look at the Austrian economists' inflation definition, like you said, I can look at the numbers of Bitcoin out there. Of course, it is a fight. It's fighting the real inflation, like the monetary inflation. Does it fight price inflation? We're not there yet. Maybe when you look at averages, yes, but it's too volatile, which is totally an argument that's okay, I guess. So what did I write about? Well, if the thing is that they already started adding stuff like a climate score to the bonds they buy within the ECB, for example. Well, first of all, the ECB is not supposed to be buying any bonds, but now they have a climate score of what companies they're going to buy. So basically, yes, it is the same argument that you are making. Do we want slavery to the bureaucrats, or do we want freedom? And the freedom, and with freedom comes all the other freedoms, freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and I think we need to be using these things that are still there to fight for Bitcoin, because, like you said, 12 words in our heads. That is freedom of expression. That is freedom of the press. That is freedom of information. And we can take a page out of the playbook from the crypto wars of the 90s, when they printed out the code for pretty good privacy and put it into a book and send it to the US Department of Justice or Department of Defense, I think, and said, "Are you going to burn it? Are you going to ban it?" And they actually backed down. Now, this is probably a bigger fight because you have to fight the central banks as well. And I don't know, are we going to win this fight in like in front of the law? I don't know, but we are going to win this fight when inflation escalates, like it does in Turkey, Nigeria, in South America. Actually, in Argentina, when they got their last IMF loan, they had to sign a piece of paper that they're not going to adopt Bitcoin. Did you know that?
Yes, I did know that. I did know that. They're so they don't even care. They don't. It's great. It's what I was saying, Nico, earlier, is that Bitcoin exposes everybody's incentives, and they're so terrified of this thing. And by the way, why do you think that they're giving El Salvador such a hard time? Because the IMF offered them a loan as well. And what do you think one of the contingencies of that loan is? Right? What
Our
do you think
Bitcoin.
what do you think one of the what do you think one of the requirements of that loan is to El Salvador? You know, so it's absurd, it's crazy, but it kind of goes back to Nico. What we were saying is all of these institutions, they were advertised to us. They have been saying that it's for the people, it's for everybody. We want
Yeah,
the world,
public.
you know,
Yeah.
whatever. But in reality, no, it's for their own bureaucracy. It's for themselves. It's not for anybody else.
I think it's important to understand that most of them really believe this, and most of them do not. I don't think that they are sitting there thinking about how to make the worst possible world happen. I think that they think that in order to keep the system going, they need to do this because they don't see any other option. Because they will not never think about Bitcoin as an option because Bitcoin basically invalidates everything they're doing. So they're just trying to double down on what they've been doing. But when you look into the history of banking, it was only centralized because it was necessary. We centralized currencies because trade was severely hampered by having too many currencies. The Bank of Amsterdam was set up, I think, in 1604, and it was a precursor to the first central bank, the Swedish Riksbank. And the Bank of Amsterdam was basically just the city of Amsterdam saying, you know, we have these merchants coming to the city twice a year or 4 times a year. They bring like 600 different currencies, and then they try to find exchange rates. It's total chaos. There's an opportunity here. We make our own money. We get all the money from that 600 different currencies. We take it. We give you our money, and you can use our money. And trade gets better, gets easier. It's the same story with gold. When you look at the history of gold coins, yes, the state did play a role because the state saw that gold was used for trade, and they made it easier by standardizing the coins and by putting some heads of state, like literal heads of state, onto the coins, like kings and princes. And then, of course, they started figuring out that they can also debase the currency by putting in some other metals, but that's a different story. I think that have you read Nick Batia's book, Layered Money?
Of course, Nick
Yeah,
is a legend. I had
another
he
Nick.
comes on the pod in a couple weeks actually.
So he basically, I think he starts the book with the Florin, right? From I think what is that, 1400? I think 1400. So you have these small Italian city states that are basically private companies in these times, right? They're comparable to what today is a private company, and they would issue gold coins, and the gold coins would be guaranteed to have a certain weight, and they figured out that they need to keep them that weight, and it's not in their interest to debase the currency because they are very small, so they don't really they are providing that money for the world basically. And these coins got such a good reputation that they were used for hundreds of years within Europe as the best money. So, and Bitcoin absolutely has the potential to be that for the whole world in a digital way. And if the central bankers do not see this, it is in the end it will be their problem. But yes, they are going to certainly try and fight it, just like any innovation has been fought, and the innovation never comes where you expect it. It's not flying cars; it's digital money.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this innovation, if we're successful, will fundamentally change the relationship between individual and state. And that's why it's so, look at what the internet has done. Bitcoin, if this wins, and I really do believe it wins because incentives are stronger than coercion, it will fundamentally change the world that we live in 10, 20 years from now completely. And I think definitely for the better. Anyways, I want to use the last couple of minutes, Nico, to talk about, because, you know, we saw the FTX blow up, and I think finally people are starting to realize to the fact that, you know, take self-custody, but also to something really interesting as well, which is the concept of Bitcoin, not crypto. Why is it Bitcoin, not crypto? I believe that Bitcoin, because of its true decentralization, is the only thing that is going to be able to resist government, the government's attempt at co-opting it and making it an extension of the current system today.
I have a few ways to look at it. I have an article also on my Substack that is called the shitcoin standard. I took this from Safedin and you know, made my own version of it, because when you really look at it, and I mean, I don't know about you, but most people start with some shitcoins at some point. When you really look at it, so what do shitcoiners do? They sell you a product based on some low IQ argument against Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin is too slow. Here, have a quicker currency. Bitcoin cannot do many things. Here, have a smart contract currency, you know. And then you forget about the actual innovation of Bitcoin, of being decentralized, being totally permissionless, especially being proof of work, you know. But then it also starts breaking down, right? Especially Ethereum. When you look at the proof of work thing, why did Ethereum change to proof of stake? Yes, to enrich the people who have a lot of Ethereum, but also because they knew that they cannot compete with Bitcoin for the proof of work long term, because of course miners will mine the best, longest, most beautiful coin and not some other shit coin, right? Then Bitcoin is the only one that has not have that did not have an ICO. So basically, the only one that does not pass the famous Howey test, right? It's the only one that is not centrally controlled by some corporation or some entity, some person who's sitting in front of the microphone rambling on about, you know. It is the only real innovation in the space, and it took me a long time to understand this, because it's so hard, because, you know, you get told, do your own research. Well, the shitcoiners will produce a whole lot of documents and a whole lot of confusion for you to do some research in, and in the end you think, yes, I mean, I'm gonna go with IOTA because it's the Internet of Things and it doesn't have any fees. It's basically what's so tragic about it, and I think we see this with FTX especially. What's so tragic about it is that you see in one sector, the so-called crypto sector, you see the solution and the innovation, which is Bitcoin, and you also see the problem on steroids, which is nihilistic fiat gambling, right? Because that's what happens when in an inflationary breakdown. You also see it when we talk about the GME and the meme stock thing. I mean, do you remember the meme stock GME AMC craze? The mainstream media was all over it. It was painted as some huge uprising by the retail investor, but all they did was buy stocks in dead companies and feel great about it.
And not only that, Nico, they stopped the trading after the little guy started doing too well. Oh man. Sorry, continue. I just had to say that.
Yeah. I mean, but when you look at the media, that there's been movies made and Netflix documentaries about the GME revolution. You know, where's the Bitcoin movie? They're not doing the Bitcoin movie because they're too scared of Bitcoin. So we have to do the Bitcoin movies, which gives it more credibility anyway. I actually, you know that did you know that Red Bull is an Austrian company?
I did know that, yes.
Yeah. So I grew up in the 90s, right, when Red Bull started. And I also wrote about this because there are some similarities. When Red Bull started, it was supposed to be super revolutionary and super cool because it was banned in France, right? The French didn't have it for a long time. It was banned in France. So everybody needed to buy Red Bull because some other country banned it, right? It made it super cool. And then you had 200 new energy drinks, we were collecting them as kids. We had like holes. Our rooms were smelling horribly, right? Because of all the energy drink cans in there. And everybody was like, yeah, it's the future. There's going to be hundreds of energy drinks. No, they all died. They all died. And then after 20 years, you have cheap store brand energy drinks that get bought by people who smoke 2 cigarettes before they even have their first coffee in the morning, right? And those are CBDCs. Those are CBDCs.
Oh man, that was a good analogy. So one of the things though, Nico, and tie this up, is my last question, is it's interesting because it's almost as if Bitcoin maximalism, some call it Bitcoin toxicity. I was actually on a panel on Bitcoin 2021 in the main stage, and the name of the panel was Why Bitcoin Toxicity is Necessary. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin toxicity? Some people call it toxicity. At this point, I wear that as a patch of honor. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin maximalism, Bitcoin toxicity? Is it necessary in this environment? Is it necessary to be that way to expose the frauds? Because, guys, I don't know about you guys, but I remember we were called disinformers when we said that inflation was coming. We were called toxic when we warned people to take self-custody, and Alex Mashinsky, the CEO of Celsius, was actually attacking us. It looks like Bitcoin maxis have been shooting 100%.
I mean, don't forget about Do Kwon buying Bitcoin for the terror reserve. I mean, that was a conundrum, right? Because the argument was, why would you be in favor of MicroStrategy buying Bitcoin but not Terra buying Bitcoin, right? And basically, that was a situation where most maxis basically did not have a real argument. It just said it smelled fishy, right? And it did, and they were right. And toxicity, it's like I said, especially in Europe, freedom of expression is not as well developed as it is in the US, and we're not used to talk about things that openly, and we have to learn this. And toxicity is a way to do this. And you need this toxicity, and there is no toxicity within the Bitcoin space. Yes, there is fights and whatever, but it's basically just a bunch of grown dudes sending orange hearts at each other all day long, right? I mean, my wife is like totally amazed by how nice everybody is, right? When we had there was one guy saying this in the chat, and I want to say hi. When we had the Bitcoin conference in Innsbruck in Austria with 900 people in September, the guys who did the catering were totally astounded because everybody just carried pull away their plates and it basically started cleaning up after themselves. They said that they never saw something like that. So the Bitcoiners are not that toxic when you let them be Bitcoiners, but when you attack them and when you tell them, no, you have to take this shitcoin and that shitcoin or the central bank digital currency, yes, then toxicity is extremely important and extremely necessary, because you have to say no, and you have to, because if you're being too polite, you have the shitcoiners are going to enter your space, and then you have. It's not even that we don't like these people. I mean, they are going to end up being Bitcoiners anyway. But you need to have, like, I'm not gonna say safe space, right? But you need to be able to have your own thing going on, and you need to be, because we know that the altcoins are going to die out eventually. So why should we not have conferences and spaces and YouTube channels committed to Bitcoin, especially because there is so much to explore. Me as a journalist, I actually decided to go down the Bitcoin route and start a podcast and a newsletter and a YouTube channel after I decided two things. First thing, I'm probably never gonna get rich with this crypto thing because so far I only lost money. And second, I'm gonna do Bitcoin only because I started with fixing the money. Even in my gold days, it was not about making money, it was about fixing it. And if I go Bitcoin only, I can concentrate on this. and not go from one blockchain thing to the other. And it's so confusing, and you can see it with the people. It fucks with their head, right? It's there's so many different ways to go, and Bitcoin is very simple, which is important. Because it's supposed to be a global monetary network. It cannot be too complicated. People need to understand it quickly, and we need to do an even better job of explaining it, educating it. UI and software, hardware. There's many things going on. More things need, because I really believe that the chance is there in building the infrastructure faster than they can fight it, and faster than they can come up with their demon coin. That's the only way to do it. So speed really is on our side. That's also why I actually quit my last job, because I realized in the Bitcoin space I need to be able to move extremely quickly, right? So like today, I mean, this is my second stream today, my third interview today. I cannot explain this to an employer, right? Even if I'm doing this as an expert, it's impossible. So I need to be on my own.
Nico, that was an absolute pleasure, man. I really enjoyed our conversation. Nico, where can people find out more about you?
Well, first of all, Nico, thanks so much for having me. I always love catching up with American Bitcoiners and doing bridging the ocean, right? And where can people find me? Well, I think you can see it on screen at Niko Jilch, which is Twitter, of course. We all spend way too much time on Twitter. It's the main hub, right? My Substack is fixthemoney.substack.com. I actually also own the domain fixthemoney.net, so I'm going to use that at some point. And my other stuff, you can find me on YouTube, and my podcast. If you just Google my name, Niko Jilch, my YouTube channel is mostly German. I do have a couple of interviews with Alex Gladstein, Nick Bhatia, Seyfedin Ammous, Luke Roman, Brent Johnson. I do have some English interviews as well. And I'm also going to be launching a couple of podcasts that I did on the not the campaign trail, but like the how do you say, the event trail or convention trail. I talked to Greg Foss and Jeff Booth and Isabella Kaminska. And actually this was already in the summer and I didn't have the time to publish it yet, but this will also come on the Substack. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, Nico. Thank you so much. Guys, that was another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. We will see you back tomorrow at 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the normal show. I'm Nico. You can follow me on Twitter at BitVault7. We love you all. Shout out to Opti for producing in the back. We will see you guys later.